Lieutenant Marcus Hale had imagined first contact would feel different. He had prepared himself for the wonders of alien culture, for dazzling halls filled with strange lights, and for conversations that would stretch the limits of translation software. He thought he would step onto the Very Dominion's orbital station as a diplomat, a representative of Earth, standing proud. But as soon as the docking bridge sealed and he followed the tall, armored guides into the station, his sense of pride shrank with every step. The Veari were not what he expected. They were tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with a kind of predatory grace. Their crystalline eyes caught the light and reflected it back in sharp, unnatural glimmers. They spoke in clipped tones that the translator in his ear struggled to match. Their voices were low and steady, but there was something in the way they looked at him, as though he was not a guest, but a curiosity, like a small animal that had wandered into the wrong den. The station itself felt no warmer. The corridors were built on a scale too large for him, the ceilings arched like the inside of a cathedral, and the air was cold and heavy. Veari soldiers stood watch at every corner, their weapons humming softly. The other humans in his group, scientists, engineers, and a few envoys, walked close together, whispering nervously. Marcus forced himself to keep his chin up, his boots steady. He knew Earth was counting on him to make a strong impression. Humanity was small in the galaxy, but it would not be invisible. Hours later, after ceremonies and briefings that felt more like tests, Marcus found himself walking alone through one of the side corridors. He was supposed to return to his assigned quarters, but the station's design confused him. Every hallway looked the same. Every door was marked in jagged Veari script his translator couldn't read. His footsteps echoed too loudly, and for the first time since arrival, he realized how quiet the station could be. That was when he noticed her. She moved out of the shadows with the speed of a hunter. Before Marcus could react, a hand pressed against his chest, shoving him firmly against the cold metal wall. He gasped, his back hitting hard enough to rattle the breath out of him. His eyes darted upward to meet hers. She was taller than the others he had met, clad in dark armor traced with faint glowing lines. Her face was angular, sharp in a way that felt carved rather than born. Her crystalline eyes fixed on him like two blades pinning him in place. For a second, Marcus thought she might strike him. Instead, she leaned closer, so close that he could feel the strange heat radiating off her. Her voice was low, a whisper that brushed against his ear but carried a weight that froze him in place. "You're mine, human." The words landed heavier than her grip. Marcus froze. His breath caught in his throat. The translator confirmed he hadn't misheard. She had, said it clearly with intent. His mind spun. Was this a threat, a cultural phrase, or something far more dangerous? Her eyes lingered on him as if daring him to respond. He wanted to push back, to demand what she meant, to remind her that he was not some pet to be claimed. But the words wouldn't come. His mouth felt dry, his voice lost. All he could do was stare back at her, caught between fear and something he couldn't name. The corridor seemed to grow narrower, the hum of the station louder. Marcus's heart beat too quickly, each thud echoing in his ears. She didn't move, her hand still holding him against the wall, though not painfully, more like a lock. A declaration that he wasn't going anywhere until she decided. Then, just as suddenly, she pulled back. Her hand slipped away, and the cold of the wall rushed into the spot where she had pressed him. She straightened, her expression unreadable. Without another word, she turned and walked down the corridor, her long strides carrying her swiftly into the shadows. Marcus stood frozen long after she was gone. His breath came back slowly, uneven and shallow. His chest ached where she had pressed him, not from pain, but from the weight of what she had said. "You're mine." The words repeated in his head like a brand. He didn't understand what they meant, not yet, but he felt deep in his bones that it wasn't something small. It wasn't something he could ignore. When his legs finally obeyed him, Marcus pushed himself off the wall and started walking again, faster this time. The station felt even larger now, every corner hiding the possibility of another encounter. He wasn't sure if he wanted to see her again, or if part of him already knew he would. And in that moment, far from Earth, on a station filled with creatures who saw humanity as nothing more than fragile newcomers, Marcus realized his mission had already changed. He had come as a diplomat. But now, something else had begun. Marcus did not sleep well that night. The guest quarters offered to the human delegation were quiet, almost too quiet, with walls that felt more like a cell than a room. The lights dimmed on their own, the air vents sighed in long, steady breaths, and still he could not shake the memory of her words. He lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling while the translator in his ear replayed the phrase again and again. The device never made mistakes. It had captured her exact whisper. "You're mine, human." The meaning gnawed at him. Among humans, it might have sounded like a threat or a strange attempt at intimacy. But among the Veyari, he had no idea. The problem was not the words themselves. It was the weight behind them, the certainty in her voice. She had spoken as if it were a truth, not a choice. When morning, or what passed for morning on a space station, came, Marcus joined the rest of the delegation in the central hall. The Veyari had prepared a meal that looked more ceremonial than edible. Long trays of glowing fruits and metallic dishes filled with steaming liquids. The humans tried to act polite, nibbling carefully while their hosts observed. Marcus kept scanning the room. He did not see her, the warrior who had cornered him, but he felt her absence like a pressure. The other Veyari glanced at him from time to time, their crystal eyes reflecting amusement. Some whispered to each other, their tones low and mocking. Marcus realized with a tightening in his chest that they already knew. Word had spread. Later he walked through the station with two of the engineers from Earth. They marveled at the massive engines humming beyond the viewports, whispering about how advanced the technology seemed. Marcus tried to listen, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He felt exposed, as if eyes followed him no matter where he went. And then it happened again. The crowd of Veyari in the marketplace parted just slightly, and she stepped through. Taller than the rest, armored in darker shades, moving with quiet authority. Commander Sereth. That was her name, he remembered now. He had heard it whispered among the guards the night before. She did not hurry, yet every stride carried her, closer until Marcus found himself frozen in place. The two engineers at his side shifted nervously, then muttered excuses and slipped away. No one wanted to stand between a Veyari warrior and her chosen, whatever Marcus had become. Sereth stopped in front of him, so close that he had to tilt his head back to meet her gaze. The marketplace hushed. Dozens of alien eyes turned toward them, watching. "You walk too freely," she said. Her voice was calm, but it carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "Do you not understand?" Marcus swallowed hard. He wanted to speak with confidence, to remind her he was here as an envoy, not a servant, but his voice came out rougher than he wanted. "Understand what?" Her eyes narrowed, catching the light like shards of glass. "That you belong to me now." A ripple moved through the crowd. Some Veyari laughed quietly, others exchanged nods. Marcus felt heat rise to his face, a mix of anger and humiliation. He wanted to shout that he belonged to no one, that humanity had fought too hard to stand on its own. But the words stuck. Speaking them here, in the middle of a crowded station, might do more damage than silence. Sereth leaned closer, her shadow falling over him. "You will remain at my side. Others will not touch what is mine." Marcus clenched his fists, but he kept his voice steady. "I didn't agree to that." For a long moment, she studied him. Not with anger, not even with scorn, something else, curiosity perhaps, or a test. Then she turned and began to walk, glancing back only once. "Follow." The crowd shifted, leaving a clear path behind her. Marcus stood frozen, heart pounding, before his legs finally obeyed. He followed, because in that moment, he saw no other choice. They moved through the station's grand corridors, passing guards who saluted her and civilians who lowered their heads. Sereth's presence commanded respect or fear. Marcus kept a step behind, his mind racing. Every glance, every whisper from the Veyari they passed reminded him that this was not just about him anymore. His actions reflected on Earth itself. At last she stopped in a smaller chamber lined with weapons mounted on the walls. Blades that shimmered faintly, rifles humming with restrained energy. She turned to face him fully, her voice lower now, almost private. "You are weaker than us," she said plainly. "Slower, fragile, yet you do not kneel. That is unusual." Marcus found his voice again. "Maybe because humans don't kneel easily." The corner of her mouth shifted, perhaps the closest thing to a smile he would ever see from her. She stepped closer again, her eyes locked on his. "Then perhaps I chose well." He bristled. "You didn't choose. I never agreed." Her eyes gleamed. "Not yet." Before he could reply, a sharp alarm cut through the chamber. Lights along the walls flashed red, and a voice in the Veyari language echoed through the station. Sereth's head snapped toward the door, her expression turning hard. She barked a command into her wrist device, then looked back at Marcus. "Stay close," she ordered. "The station is under attack." Marcus's breath caught. Attack? By whom? He barely had time to think before the floor trembled beneath them, and the sound of distant explosions rolled through the walls. In that moment, his uneasy role as Sereth's claim became something else entirely. The walls shook again, harder this time, and the lights above flickered. Marcus felt the tremor run through his chest like a drumbeat. The alarm still howled across the station, a steady, piercing note that meant only one thing: danger. Sereth moved quickly, her long strides taking her toward the door. She did not look back, but Marcus felt her words cling to him like chains. "Stay close." He ran to keep up, his boots pounding against the metal floor. The corridors were already crowded. Veyari soldiers rushed past, their armor gleaming with energy, weapons in their hands. Civilians scattered in the opposite direction, their faces sharp with fear. The voices that rose around Marcus were deep and harsh, filled with a language he could not follow. He felt small, lost in the flood of bodies, but Sereth never slowed. The two of them reached a wide platform with high glass panels. Beyond the glass, the black of space opened up. Marcus's stomach tightened when he saw them. The ships. Dark, jagged vessels cut across the stars like knives. They were larger than anything he had seen before, their hulls covered in cruel edges that seemed designed to frighten as much as to fight. Energy beams lanced from their sides, hammering the station's outer shields. Each impact made the glass panels vibrate, sending cracks of light across the protective barrier. Sereth's jaw tightened. "Kuroth," she spat, as if the word itself was poison. Marcus had never heard the name before, but he could feel the weight in her voice. Whoever they were enemies, and dangerous ones. A sudden explosion shook the platform and the glass panels dimmed as the shield strained. Veyari officers shouted orders, their crystal eyes flashing in the emergency lights. Marcus stumbled but caught himself on the railing. He had no weapon, no training for this kind of battle. His role was supposed to be words and diplomacy, not survival in a war zone. Sereth snapped something into her wrist device, then turned to him. "You will not leave my side, do you understand?" Marcus clenched his fists. "And if I do?" Her eyes locked on his, sharp and unyielding. "You will not." Before he could answer, the floor shook again. This time the alarm shifted to a deeper, harsher tone. A breach. The Kuroth were inside. Veyari soldiers surged toward the doors as they slid open with a hiss. The first wave of attackers stormed in. Towering figures clad in black armor, their helmets shaped like skulls. Their weapons spat bolts of green fire that scorched the walls and floor. The clash was immediate. Veyari blades met Kuroth rifles, in a storm of sound and light. The air filled with the hiss of energy shields and the crack of breaking metal. Marcus stumbled back, covering his head as sparks rained down. Sereth drew her weapon in a single motion, a long blade that shimmered, with a faint blue glow extended from her hand. She met the first Kuroth head-on, striking with such speed that Marcus barely followed her movements. Her blade cut through the enemy's weapon and into his chest, sending him crashing to the floor. More came. The fight spread across the platform, a swirl of armored bodies colliding in violence. Marcus pressed himself against the wall, his heart hammering. He knew he couldn't fight like them, but as the battle raged, his eyes caught something different. Above the platform, the lights flickered again. Not from damage, but from a fault in the system. The shields were overloading in patterns he recognized. He had seen something like this before, during training simulations back on Earth. The Veyari were too focused on the enemy at their doors to notice that their entire defense grid was about to collapse. His throat tightened. If the shields failed, the next volley from the Kuroth ships would tear the station apart. He glanced at Sereth. She was locked in combat with two warriors at once, her movements fluid and deadly. She had no time for anything else. Marcus took a deep breath. His fear screamed at him to stay down, to stay safe, but another voice pushed louder, the part of him that remembered why he was here, why humanity had reached for the stars in the first place. They were not weak. They were not property. He ran, not toward the fight, but toward a side corridor marked with flashing yellow lights, a maintenance route. The Veyari soldiers ignored him, too caught up in the clash to care where a human ran. Marcus slipped through the doorway and into the narrow passage, his breath ragged, his hands shaking. The hum of the station's systems filled his ears. He could feel the energy surging unevenly through the walls, smell the faint burn of overheated circuits. He found a control panel and yanked it open. Sparks flew, and the harsh glow of alien wiring greeted him. It was nothing like human tech, yet at the same time, it spoke a familiar language. Power, flow, failure. He pulled the tools from his belt, small things, meant for repairs on the human shuttle, and set to work. Wires sparked against his fingers, burning his skin, but he kept moving. He rerouted connections, forced coolant into systems that weren't designed for it, and patched a loop with nothing but stripped metal and raw nerve. Behind him, the walls shook again. The battle raged on. He had no idea if Sereth was winning, if the Veyari were holding the line. He only knew that if the shields fell, none of them would survive. The system roared back to life, lights surging brighter. Marcus fell back, panting, his hands blackened and raw. He heard the deep hum of the shields stabilizing, holding strong against the next volley of enemy fire. For a moment he sat there, breathing hard, listening to the sound of the battle through the walls. Then a shadow fell across him. Sereth stood in the doorway, her blade still glowing, her armor scarred. She stared at him in silence, her crystalline eyes burning brighter than ever. "You disobeyed me," she said. Marcus wiped the sweat from his brow, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "I saved your station." For the first time, she did not answer immediately. Her eyes lingered on him, steady and unreadable, and then, without warning, she extended her hand. Marcus hesitated, then placed his trembling hand in hers. She pulled him to his feet with a strength that nearly lifted him off the ground. "You are mine," she said again, but her voice was different now, less like a claim, more like an oath. The station had survived the first wave, but Marcus could feel the strain in the air. Every corridor hummed with unstable power, and every face he passed carried the shadow of fear. The Veyari were strong, yes, but even their strength had limits. The Kuroth had not retreated. They circled the station like predators, waiting for their prey to weaken. Marcus walked beside Sereth now. She no longer dragged him or shoved him into place. Instead, she kept him close in a way that felt deliberate, as if his presence was now more than a symbol. Yet the stares from the other Veyari burned hotter than before. He could feel their judgment as clearly as if it were spoken. Some looked at him with disbelief. A human, fragile and small, had interfered in a battle and touched their sacred systems. Others looked with suspicion, as though his actions had been a trick. But most, of all, they looked at him as if they were trying to understand why Commander Sereth allowed him to walk at her side. She ignored their gazes. Her steps were as steady as ever, her voice sharp as she issued orders to passing soldiers. But Marcus noticed the way her eyes flicked toward him every so often, as if measuring him, weighing what he had done against what she thought he could become. They reached a command chamber deep in the core of the station. Massive screens showed the Kuroth ships circling, their weapons glowing faintly. Veyari officers worked frantically at their consoles, their words clipped and urgent. The air was heavy with tension. A tall officer with pale silver eyes turned toward Sareth. His voice was cold, carrying no respect. "You risked much to protect that one." He pointed at Marcus without hesitation. "Why bring him here? He has no place among us." Marcus felt the weight of every gaze turned toward him. His chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, but Sareth stepped forward before he could. "He has already done more than half the officers in this room," she said. Her tone was not raised, but the authority in it silenced the chamber. Without him, the shields would have failed. The officer's crystal eyes narrowed. By accident, perhaps, or by luck. Marcus clenched his fists but stayed silent. He knew this was not his fight, not in words. Sareth's gaze swept across the room, her voice cutting like a blade. It was not luck. It was will and skill. Do not mistake the difference. The silence stretched for a long moment. Finally, the officer turned away, muttering under his breath. The others bent back over their consoles, though their glances still flicked toward Marcus. Sareth turned to him. "You see now," she said quietly enough that only he could hear. "They do not respect weakness, but they cannot ignore results." Marcus met her gaze, his voice steady though his heart still raced. "I wasn't trying to impress them. I just didn't want to die." Her eyes lingered on him, unreadable. Then she turned back to the screens. "That is what makes it matter." The command chamber shook again as another volley from the Kuroth struck the shields. Sparks rained from the ceiling, and one of the consoles burst in a shower of light. The Veyari soldiers cursed, rushing to reroute systems. Marcus stepped closer to the displays, studying them. The Kuroth weren't attacking randomly. Their strikes were measured, probing, testing the defenses. He recognized the pattern. He had seen something like it in human war archives. They were softening the target, waiting for the weakest point to give before delivering a killing blow. He swallowed hard. "They're not trying to destroy the station outright," he said aloud. "They're trying to bleed you dry." Some of the officers turned toward him, their faces twisted in annoyance. But Sareth's eyes sharpened. "Explain." Marcus pointed at the screens. "Every hit is just enough to force you to use more power. They'll keep you patching holes, until you can't patch anymore. Then they'll come inside, and finish what they started." The chamber fell into silence. No one spoke, but the truth of his words was visible on the screens. The Kuroth ships moved like hunters, circling with patience. One of the younger officers spat in frustration. "If he is right, then what choice do we have? Our defenses cannot hold forever." Marcus hesitated. He was only human, far from home, standing in the heart of an alien war. But he also knew one thing. Waiting to be worn down was no plan at all. You can't sit here and let them control the pace. You have to take it from them. The room erupted in disbelief. Voices rose, mocking and dismissive. A human daring to speak strategy in a Veyari war council? It was unthinkable, but Sareth did not laugh. She stared at him, her eyes steady as if searching for something deeper. "And how would you suggest we do that, human?" Marcus's throat went dry. He was not a general, not even a soldier, but he remembered the simulations, the old war reports, the countless times humanity had fought against stronger enemies and found ways to win. "You make them chase you," he said at last. "Draw them into a fight they don't expect. Force them into your ground instead of waiting on theirs." The words hung in the air. Some scoffed, some muttered insults. But Sareth's expression shifted slightly, almost thoughtful. Before anyone could respond, the alarms blared again. A section of the station had been breached. Kuroth warriors were inside. Sareth drew her blade. The blue glow lit her face as she turned to Marcus. "Stay with me," she ordered again. But this time her voice was different. Not a command of ownership, but of trust. Marcus nodded, his chest tightening with a mix of fear and resolve. He didn't know if his ideas would save them, but he knew one thing with certainty. Hiding would save no one, and so he followed her once more into the heart of the storm. The air in the lower decks was thick with smoke and heat. Alarms pulsed red across the narrow corridors, and the sound of weapons echoed from every direction. Marcus kept close behind Sereth as she moved with her blade drawn, her armor marked by earlier battles, but her steps steady and controlled. The Kuroth were inside the station now. He could hear their voices, metallic through their helmets, deep and cruel. They moved like shadows, groups of them sweeping through the halls with their weapons raised. The Veyari soldiers fought back with fierce skill, but for every enemy that fell, more seemed to take their place. Marcus tried to keep his fear from showing. He had never been in a battle like this. His body wanted to run, to find a place to hide until it was all over, but the thought of hiding made his stomach twist. He remembered what he had said in the council chamber, that they had to stop letting the Kuroth control the fight. Now those words burned in his chest. Sereth stopped suddenly, pressing her hand against the wall. Her crystalline eyes glowed faintly in the emergency light as she listened to the sounds ahead. Then she turned to him. "They are cutting toward the power conduits," she said. "If they disable them, the shields will fail." Marcus's heart quickened. He thought of the pattern he had seen on the command screens. The Kuroth wanted the Veyari to bleed out slowly. If they reached the conduits, it would end even faster. "I can help," Marcus said, his voice low but firm. Sereth tilted her head, studying him. "You do not carry a weapon." "I don't need one," he answered. "I know the systems. I can shut off access before they reach it." Her eyes narrowed as if measuring his words, then she nodded once. "Do it. I will keep them from reaching you." They moved quickly through the corridors, ducking under fallen beams and stepping over broken panels. Marcus found a service hatch and dropped to his knees, forcing it open with his bare hands. Sparks jumped at him as he pulled the cover free, revealing a tangle of glowing wires and conduits humming with power. His hands trembled, but he forced them steady. He recognized the lines now, the same system he had worked on earlier when the shields nearly collapsed. The Kuroth were clever, but they had underestimated one thing: humans could adapt. He pulled a tool from his belt and began rerouting the lines. He shifted energy into sealed compartments, locking down pathways so that if the Kuroth tried to overload the grid, it would burn itself out before reaching the conduits. It was not elegant, it was not clean, but it would hold. Behind him, the sound of battle grew louder. Sereth had taken her stance in the corridor, her blade slicing arcs of blue light. Marcus glanced back once and saw her cutting down two armored warriors at once, her movements fierce and precise. The clash of her blade against their weapons echoed like thunder, but more were coming. The Kuroth pressed forward, their rifles spitting green fire that scorched the walls. Sereth deflected some shots, dodged others, but Marcus could see the strain in her movements. She was fast, but she was not untouchable. He worked faster, sweat dripping down his face as he crossed wires and sealed connections with nothing but raw instinct. His skin burned where sparks kissed him, but he didn't stop. Each second mattered. Then the panel hummed loudly and the lights above flickered into a steady glow. Marcus exhaled, relief flooding his chest. "It's done," he shouted. "They can't cut the conduits now." Sereth didn't look back, but her voice carried strong even through the clash of weapons. "Good. Now move." Marcus grabbed the edge of the hatch and pulled himself up, just as a Kuroth soldier charged down the corridor. The enemy raised his weapon, aiming straight at him. Marcus froze. In the blink of an eye, Sereth moved between them. Her blade swept upward, knocking the rifle aside, and then she drove the weapon deep into the Kuroth's chest. The armored figure collapsed at her feet. She turned, her crystal eyes locking on Marcus. "Stay behind me," she said. But Marcus shook his head, his voice tight with determination. "I can't just hide. If you fall, who will keep this station alive?" For a moment, Sereth stared at him. Then, to his surprise, her mouth curved slightly, something sharp like the edge of approval. "Then fight in your way," she said. They moved again, side by side now. Sareth struck down the enemies in their path while Marcus used his eyes and his quick hands to sabotage systems, locking doors, rerouting power, and sealing off corridors so the Koroth could not spread. Together they created chaos the invaders had not expected. By the time they reached another junction, the noise of the battle had shifted. The Koroth advance had slowed. Marcus could hear Veyari soldiers pressing forward now, reclaiming ground, instead of losing it. Sareth turned to him, her blade still glowing faintly, her armor scratched and scorched. "You force them into confusion," she said. "You make them chase shadows." Marcus nodded, his chest heaving. "It's not strength, but it works." Her eyes lingered on him. "Strength takes many forms." The corridor lights flickered again, but this time not from damage. It was the station stabilizing, holding its ground. For the first time since the attack began, Marcus felt the weight on his chest lighten just a little. They were not safe yet. Not by far, but they had turned something. And in the look Sareth gave him, he saw not just ownership, not just curiosity, but respect. The station groaned like a wounded beast. Metal beams trembled, sparks rained from broken ceilings, and the air was filled with the sharp scent of burning wires. The Koroth had not given up. Their ships still fired volley after volley into the shields, and more of their warriors pushed through breached corridors. Marcus ran beside Sareth, his lungs burning, his body aching from hours of strain. He had patched conduits, sealed systems, and locked down pathways until his fingers bled. Yet the battle still raged on, and he knew they were reaching the breaking point. They entered one of the central hangars, a vast chamber large enough to hold entire fleets. The sight made Marcus stop cold. A massive hole had been torn into the far wall. The station's shield shimmered faintly across the breach, holding back the void of space. But inside the hangar, dozens of Koroth soldiers poured through, their weapons flashing green fire. The Veyari defenders were falling back, their lines breaking under the relentless assault. Sareth did not hesitate. With a sharp cry, she charged forward, her blade leaving a streak of blue light in the smoke-filled air. Marcus had no weapon, but he followed anyway, his heart pounding. The battle was chaos. The crash of blades, the hiss of rifles, the screams of wounded filled the chamber. Sareth moved like a storm, her strikes fast and merciless. Marcus stayed behind her, his eyes darting for anything he could use. He spotted a control terminal near the wall and sprinted to it, his hands flying across the alien interface. He found what he needed, the hangar's gravity systems. He rerouted power quickly, his breath ragged. A warning flashed across the screen, but he ignored it and slammed the command through. The floor trembled, and suddenly, the gravity shifted. The Koroth stumbled as their armored boots lost purchase. Some floated upward, crashing into the ceiling, while others slid helplessly across the slick floor. The Veyari seized the moment, striking hard, driving their enemies back. Sareth glanced, over her shoulder at Marcus, her crystal eyes flashing with fire. "You turned the ground itself into a weapon," she called. Marcus gritted his teeth, forcing the system to hold. "It's not strength, it's survival." But the Koroth adapted. Quickly, their magnetic boots locked them down and their advance surged again. Marcus cursed under his breath, searching for another solution. His gaze fell on the fuel lines running along the hangar wall. Dangerous, desperate, but it could work. He ran toward them, ignoring the sparks and stray shots flying around him. His hands shook as he tore open the panel, exposing the glowing tubes of volatile fuel. He stripped a wire from his toolkit, biting back fear as he jammed it into the system. Sparks leapt, and the fuel lines hummed with unstable energy. Behind him, Sareth fought like a force of nature. She cut down one enemy, then another. Her armor dented, her blades slick with energy discharge. But Marcus could see the fatigue in her movements. She was strong, but even she could not hold forever. The fuel line buckled under his sabotage, and alarms screamed through the hangar. Marcus shouted across the chaos, "Sareth, get them back!" She looked at him, her eyes narrowing as she realized what he had done. Without hesitation, she barked an order in her own tongue. The Veyari soldiers began to fall back, dragging their wounded with them. The Koroth pressed forward, thinking victory was close. Marcus yanked one final wire and dove behind a piece of wreckage. The fuel line erupted. A wall of fire roared across the hangar, sweeping through the enemy ranks. The blast tore through their formation, throwing armored figures into the walls and scattering their weapons. The heat seared Marcus's skin even from his cover, but he forced himself to stay low until the explosion faded. When he lifted his head, the hangar was a ruin. Fires burned along the walls, and smoke coiled toward the breach. The Kuroth lay in heaps, their advance broken. The Veyari stood stunned, their crystal eyes wide as they looked from the wreckage to Marcus. Sareth strode toward him, her blade still glowing, her armor scorched and battered. She stopped in front of him, her shadow long against the flames. For a moment neither spoke. Then she reached down and pulled him to his feet with her usual iron strength. "You risked your life for this station," she said. Her voice carried through the hangar, strong enough that every Veyari nearby could hear. "You fought without blade, without armor, yet you struck harder than any warrior." Marcus coughed, his throat raw from smoke. "I just did what I had to." Sareth's eyes blazed. "No, you did more." She turned, her voice rising even louder. "This human saved us. Do not forget it." The Veyari soldiers looked at Marcus with something new in their eyes. Not mockery, not suspicion, but respect. Some even bowed their heads slightly, a gesture Marcus had not seen before. The hangar shook again as another volley from the Kuroth ship struck the shields. The battle was not over. But in that moment, Marcus felt something shift. Humanity was no longer invisible. He was no longer just a curiosity. Sareth leaned closer, her voice low enough for only him to hear. "You are mine," she whispered again, but this time, the words carried no ownership. They sounded like a vow, a bond forged in fire and battle. Marcus met her gaze, his body trembling with exhaustion but his voice steady. "Then fight with me, not over me." For the first time, Sareth's hard expression softened. She gave a single nod, sharp and certain. "Together, then." And as the hangar, filled with the sound of alarms and the glow of fire, Marcus realized the true fight was only beginning. The station drifted in silence after the last waves of battle ended. Fires still burned in the broken hangar, and smoke curled through the wide corridors, but the Kuroth were gone. Their ships had retreated, leaving behind only wreckage, scorch, marks, and the bitter memory of their strength. Marcus stood in the command chamber, his body heavy with exhaustion. His clothes were scorched, his hands blistered, and his lungs ached with every breath. Yet as he looked around, he felt something he had not felt since arriving among the Veyari. He belonged. The council chamber was full, but not with whispers or scorn. The crystal-eyed leaders sat tall, their gazes fixed on him. Soldiers lined the walls, battered but alive, their armor marked with scars from the battle. And at the center of it all stood Sareth, her armor cleaned but still showing the dents of combat, her blade sheathed at her side. It was Sareth who spoke first. Her voice carried the same steel as always, but there was something warmer beneath it now. "The Kuroth came with fire and cruelty. They thought us weak. They thought our allies were nothing." She turned her head slightly, her eyes falling on Marcus. "They were wrong." The chamber was silent as all eyes shifted toward him. Marcus swallowed hard. He had never wanted to stand in front of leaders, never wanted to give speeches. He was just a human who fixed machines, who tried to survive. But now every pair of eyes waited for his words. "I didn't fight with strength," he said, his voice rough but steady. "I don't have the power you all have. I can't swing a blade like Sareth or hold a line like your soldiers, but humans survive because we adapt. We look at the pieces, the broken things, and we find a way to make them work. That's all I did." He paused, glancing down at his blistered hands before raising his head again. "But survival isn't enough. If we only survive, the Kuroth will come again and again until we can't anymore. We have to do more. We have to fight in ways they don't expect. We have to stand together." For a moment, the chamber was silent. Then, slowly, one of the council leaders rose. The elder's crystal eyes glowed faintly as he spoke. This human speaks with truth. Another rose, then another, until the chamber filled with a low murmur of agreement. Marcus felt his chest tighten not with fear, but with something close to pride. Sareth stepped closer, her gaze locked on him. "You said once that you did not belong here," she said. "Now you see that you do. You are not only mine, Marcus. You are ours." He almost laughed, though his throat was too dry. "That's a lot of responsibility," he said quietly. Her lips curved slightly, almost a smile. "It is what you earned." The council declared the battle a victory, though a costly one. The station was scarred, the fleet reduced, and many soldiers had fallen. Yet they had survived against overwhelming force. That mattered. More than survival, they had learned something new. Human ingenuity could change the shape of battle itself. Later, Marcus stood alone in the hangar where it had all ended. The fires were gone, the wreckage cleared, but the scars remained. The silence here felt heavy. He thought of the faces of those who hadn't lived to see this quiet. He thought of Earth, far away, never knowing what battles their children now fought among the stars. Sareth joined him, her steps silent as always. She stood beside him without speaking at first, her eyes fixed on the stars beyond the breach where the shield shimmered faintly. "They will come back," Marcus said. His voice was soft, but certain. "Yes," Sareth replied. "The Kuroth do not forget. They will come with greater fire, greater numbers." She turned to him, her gaze sharp and steady. "But so will we." He looked at her, tired but determined. "We'll be ready." There was a long pause. Then she leaned slightly closer, her voice a whisper, just as it had been the first time. "You are mine, human." But this time Marcus did not freeze. He met her gaze and answered softly, "Only if you are mine too." For a heartbeat, Sareth's eyes glowed brighter, like fire trapped in crystal. Then she gave a small, sharp nod. Not a smile, not laughter, just a vow. They stood together in the broken hangar, two figures against the endless stars. Around them, the station healed, soldiers worked, and new plans began to form. The war was not over. It had only begun. But in that fragile, quiet moment, Marcus understood something important. Humanity's strength was not in its weapons, not in its armies, but in its will to endure and change the rules when survival demanded it. The Veyari had seen it now. The galaxy would see it soon, and when the Kuroth returned, they would not face only crystal-eyed warriors or fragile humans. They would face something greater, an alliance bound by blood, by battle, and by the stubborn refusal to fall. Marcus took one last look at the stars. For the first time since Sareth had pressed him against the wall and whispered those strange, fierce words, he no longer felt like prey. He felt like a fighter. And this time, he whispered, back, not to her, not to anyone in the hangar, but to the universe itself. "We're ready,"